Hey folks, welcome back to the shop. Frank here. This is part 2 of the printer stand build. We're building a solid cherry printer stand that will hold 2 printers in the house. I have a color laser printer that'll be in the bottom and a inkjet photo printer that'll sit on top of the stand. This is just because I don't have surface area and this particular countertop in my pantry for both printers, and I don't want to put the other printer up in the office upstairs. So I'm stacking them, and we're building a cherry stand to hold them both. In the first episode, if you missed it, you might want to go back and check it. We got the lumber down from a stack of lumber that I have and milled it down, broke it down into shorter pieces and milled it to approximate dimension, glued up panels for the printer stand, and then surfaced and sized those panels. So we're starting off in this episode with 5 panels which are sized to the correct dimension, and we'll be running them through the dovetail jig, the Lee 24-inch dovetail jig, building the carcass for the printer stand, and then we'll mill the finished top on the shaper, wood shaper. So stick around. This is going to get interesting. So this is the Lee dovetail jig, and it'll do dovetails on boards up to 24 inches wide, and as I mentioned earlier, you can space the pins and tails any way you want. You can make them asymmetrical. In this case, I'm doing symmetrical arrangement, and I've got a scrap board the same thickness. This is actually a cut off from one of the panels in the back as a spacer board. I've got one of the sides. This is the inside of the top right panel, and we're getting set up here to mark this for the depth of cut. So this is a tail board. I'm going to take a pin board and put it up against here and make a thin pencil line that we'll use to set the depth of cut. So you of course need to assemble your panels into the arrangement that you want, and I've done that already, and I've marked the 4 panels. So this is the right inside top panel, the right panel, the top of it on the inside face, which would make this the front edge. So it would be oriented like this in the box. We're going to cut our tails in this board so that they will be visible from the side. So picking which board to be your pins and tails, I mean, generally you want the pins to be on the board which is going to take any pulling force. So on the face, for example, the front of a drawer front, you want it to be a pin board because the pins are angled and they can take the tension better than the tails. The tails could pull out of the pins, for example. So you normally would orient them that way. In this case, it's strictly decorative. There's no loads on the piece. So you want to pick which board is going to show the tails, which would be more visible, look more like a dovetail than if you just show the pins. All right, I'm getting ready to set up the routers to route the dovetails, and I'm going to use 2 different routers. Actually, they're 2 identical routers, or almost identical. The only difference is the type of grip on them. But there are 3 routers here. They're all the same. I love these routers. These are Porter cable, old standby routers. I've had, some of these I've had for years. What I like about these routers is that the bases are interchangeable. So this is a regular straight base with 2 handles. You can take that off and put on a D-handle base, or you can take the motor out and you put on a plunge router base. So these are very versatile routers, plenty of horsepower. I think they're 1 3/4 horsepower, and these are model 69. Model 6902 motor. 6902 motor. And then the bases are different. So this is a type fixed base, type 8. This is a model 1001 router base. I'm going to say this one's newer, but doesn't matter. This router actually comes out of my D handle. This motor comes out of my D handle, so it has a shorter cord on it because it plugs into the D handle. The D handle's nice because it has a trigger for turning on and off, as opposed to having to hit the rocker switch. So if you're doing a lot of production work, the D handle is very comfortable to use. You can switch the handle to the other side if you're left-handed, and it's a nice base. Now, I don't use it for routing dovetails. I use the regular standard base for routing dovetails. I've got the 2 different bits that the Lee jig suggests. The number 140 5/16 straight bit and the number 80 10-degree or 8-degree dovetail bit. And you buy these from Lee, and they're designed to work with this jig. Next step is to set the depth of cut of this bit using the line we just made on the tailboard. All right, so now, here's my butchie. Now we're going to set the cutter height to the center of this line. Okay. So the spacer board behind the tailboard, we'll leave it here for the most of the cutting. It's a piece of waste, so it's sacrificial scrap, and it's an offcut from one of the panels. So it's the same thickness as the panels that we're cutting, and that's important. The tailboard here is flush at the top here. And we'll go ahead and cut. We're going to cut into these rounded spaces, and it will leave tails between them. Mistakes happen no matter what you do, and I got a little bit of tear out here. This little knot here which created a weak spot, which caused this piece to tear out. So I'm going to... One of the things about woodworking is learning how to fix your mistakes. And fortunately, it's usually pretty forgiving in woodworking. This is the... No, that didn't work. Let me pick that up. So fortunately, woodworking mistakes are usually pretty forgiving. This is the inside of the case, and actually left inside. Might be the front edge, but we may flip it around. Since the front and back are interchangeable, since I've got my dovetails are symmetric, I can, if this is the top front, which it looks like it might be, I can switch it around, use the other side, I believe. So we'll see. And then I'll trim this off by hand. So we've got the tail boards all cut, and next thing to do is to set up to cut the pins on the top and bottom panels. Using a piece of scrap as a test board, installed it here with the fingers pointing the other direction. Made a few test cuts to adjust the size so that we and verify correct fit. And then we can take the other two panels, the pin boards, and route the pins on them. So I've got one of the pin boards in here, and we're getting ready to route with a straight bit, the straight cutting bit, the pins. So we'll remove these areas of wood, leaving a pin at each of these locations, or a half pin down here, half pin at each end and pins in the middle. I told you I like these Porter cable routers, and that's another reason why I like them. The top is flat. You can turn them upside down and sit them down. When you're using a dovetail jig, finish the cut, you can just turn it upside down and sit on top of the jig. It sits there fine, stable. So I really like these routers. I'm not endorsing them in any way. I actually have another one in the router lift here in the router table, so that makes a total of 4 of these Porter cable routers. I do have a Hitachi that I leave a dovetail bit in for dovetailing drawers. Got a little DeWalt cordless and another little Rockwell half-horse router that I use for trimming laminate or that sort of thing. So some of the routers I leave bits in. I leave the regular drawer dovetail bit in the Hitachi router all the time. It just never changes, so it's always set up, and that's for the drawer dovetail jig, which is on the floor here. So underneath this bench on the floor, that's for routing drawer dovetails, which are standard 1/2-inch dovetails. Okay, got all the boards routed, and you know, I don't have any responsibility to Lee for the dovetail jig. I had this dovetail jig for 20 years. I bought it around 2000, 2001, 2002 maybe, something like that. And the instructions in here are exceptionally good. So if you buy a Lee dovetail jig, the instructions are excellent, and the jig works great. Again, no affiliation. I just like it. It's one of my favorite tools. All right, I'm going to get set up. We're going to assemble the printer stand box first, glue it up, and then we'll come back. I've got a decorative fascia to put on it, and then we also have the top to mill for it. So we'll come back, set up to glue this stuff up. Like I say, you can never have enough horsepower or enough clamps. So when you set the dovetail jig depth of cut, you set it so the pins are just a little bit proud, a little bit long. So that gives you just a little bit of material to sand off to get a nice flush finish there. Okay, I've got the case sanded, got the pins sanded flush, top and bottom not as important. The two sides sanded to 180 grit. So here's the finished top. Now it's not finished. It's the finish top. So this will be the top of this. It'll go on here. We're going to go to the shaper and put a decorative edge on this. All right, so this is the shaper, and it has a spindle which spins at 10,000 RPM, and there's a nut and a keyed washer to hold the cutter bit on, and you can get all kinds of cutters such as this. This is a 3/4 inch spindle. You can change the spindle out to 1 inch or 1 1/4 inch. There's currently a 3/4 inch spindle in there. So cutters come like this. That's just a typical cutter that's similar to what's on there. You can also get cope and stick sets. So this is a set of cutters that allow you to cut male and female interlocking joints for door frames and windows. So there's a series of cutters there. And maybe you can see here the types of cuts that can be made. So that's the cope and stick set. And then there's panel raising bits that allow you to cut raised panels. So it's a 5-inch diameter. Okay, so any of these types of cutters can be used on here. So it's much more versatile than, say, a router table, and of course it's more horsepower. It's a 3 horsepower induction motor. Currently I have a Roman OG bit in there, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to use it to cut this profile on the top of for the top of the printer stand. All right, so we'll get the top over here, run it through here to take a couple minutes. When this applies to a router table as well. When you're profiling the edge of a board, you want to do the end grain first, because you'll get a little bit of chip out at the corners, and then you come back and do the long grain afterwards. So that's what we'll do. We'll do the two end grain sides, and then we'll come back and do the front, which will be long grain. So where it's important that a board be flat, no twist, and square, you run it through the joiner first. You saw me do that, then through the planer to make the other side parallel. So this piece, which will become our valence, is absolutely square and flat. It had a little bit of twist to it when I started, so it's good to go. Going to cut it to length, and I think we're just going to do a long curve to it. So this piece will go across here. So I'm going to make a cut. I'm going to cut this off. I'm going to cut it a little bit long and make a couple additional cuts, and we'll sneak up on the actual length and get it to be a nice snug fit. So I want to draw an arc on the bottom edge of this valence to cut it out. So what I've done is just taken a long scrap, screwed it to the workbench here, 10 inches in, and this board is 20 inches wide. Put a pencil through it, and so I can mark an arc, use it basically like a compass. I guess you might call it a trammel point. So, all right. So that gives me a line to cut on. We'll cut it on the bandsaw, then we'll sand it smooth and install it on the case. Looks mostly symmetrical. All right, so I inset it about 1/8 of an inch just to give a shadow line. So we'll glue that in place. I think this top will just screw on. Now we could glue it because the grain's running in the same direction, but I think I'm just going to screw it on. That way, if I change my mind about it, I can always take it off. All right, I'm going to put a little bit of glue on the valence and set it in place. It's in there snug. It won't need even any clamps, I don't think. I may put a couple clamps on it. All right, I'm back in the shop today. We left yesterday. We just finished gluing this valence in. I'm getting ready to attach the decorative top. So overall, I'm pleased with it. Got a couple of interlopers here. Butchie's being a good boy, huh? Yeah. Being a good boy. Where's Brutus? Here he comes. Not to be left out of the mix. They're pretty excited because there's a contractor working here today out in the backyard. Okay, so basically it's done. I'm going to drill some holes through the top here, put probably just 4 screws. There's no, all the weight's just going to be the printer sitting on here, and it doesn't weigh much. But we just have that to hold the top on. And I'm doing that because since the wood grain is running in the same direction on both these pieces, I could actually glue it together and clamp it, and it would be permanent. But I don't know. I just there's a part of me that hesitates to do that for some reason, so I'm just going to put some screws and screw it together, and then we'll put a coat of finish on it. This is a tack cloth, which will pick up any dust remaining on the surface. This is just cheesecloth impregnated with a sticky, and traditionally it was like a boiled linseed oil or a varnish that was tacky. And it doesn't say what this has on it, but so I'm using a wipe-on polyurethane satin. I like this product because it's so easy to apply. All right, so what I like about this wiping varnish is you just use a rag to apply it. So there's no cleaning brushes. There's no drips or runs that you have to worry about as you would with a brush. Now, the downside is it puts on a thinner coat of resin than a brushing varnish would. So you may have to put two times, twice as many, maybe even 3 times as many of coats of this. But they go on so quickly, you can do the entire piece in 5 minutes, whereas you might spend 20 minutes or more brushing on a coat of polyurethane varnish. I'll make a comment about using cherry lumber and dealing with sapwood. So you can see a streak of sapwood here. It doesn't, it's whiter than the remaining lumber. Now, it's mostly only visible on the inside. There's a little bit on the outside. Normally in a piece of furniture, cherry furniture, I will not allow any sapwood to be visible. And if you look at the pieces of photographs that I put up on earlier in the video, you'll see, or in part 1 of this project, the video, part 1 video of this project, there's no sapwood visible on any of my furniture pieces. This is being a utility piece. I'm making allowances for that, since it's going to be, it's not really a piece of furniture as much as just a, well, it's a printer stand. So it's not the same as a desk or something. It's not an heirloom quality piece of furniture. So I'm making allowances and allowing some sapwood, minimal amount. But what happens? The reason you want to be careful about using sapwood is that the other wood, the heartwood of cherry, darkens with age, and the sapwood doesn't. So the contrast between the sapwood and the heartwood is going to get more and more apparent over time. So if you're buying, for example, kitchen cabinets and sapwood is showing in the door panels, when the cabinets are first manufactured, it's a modest difference in color, but over time it gets more and more pronounced, and in 10 or 15 years it stands out like a sore thumb. So if you're buying real cherry cabinets, be careful of that. It's not considered a flaw in the hardwood manufacturing industry. So they'll use it, they'll allow it without any concerns, because they're not dealing with the aftermath 10 years later, where you have this very visible streak of sapwood going down the middle of your cabinet doors, for example. So be aware of that. I love working with cherry lumber. It smells so good when you cut it. It has a very pleasant, sweet aroma. It machines really well, takes crisp corners and edges. It's a nice, tight, closed grain. So it's a closed cell wood, as opposed to walnut, which is open cell, or oak, which are open cell woods. So it finishes nicely with fewer coats of finish because it's a smoother surface. So the first coat of the finish is soaked in. I'm going back over it with another coat just to make sure the surface is saturated. All right, so I think that's about finished. Don't know how well the figure on this wood shows on the camera, but it's pretty nice. All right, so that's the first coat of finish. Just wipe on with a piece of clean cotton rag, an old t-shirt, a piece cut out of an old t-shirt. Let this sit overnight. We'll come back, put another coat on it. I'll probably put a total of 3 coats on it, and then we'll set it up in the pantry and see how it fits. So the only real visible flaw is this knot, which It's on the bottom, so there'll be a printer sitting on that. There's a little streak of what I think what is called red rot, which is kind of adds some character. All right, folks, the printer stand or printer organizer is done, and I moved it into the house. I'll put some pictures up showing its location in the pantry, which is off the kitchen in the house, and is a lot more accessible than the office. I do have an office upstairs with a couple servers and a couple other printers, but didn't want to take this little inkjet printer up there. And inkjet printers, if you don't use them on a regular basis, the nozzles dry out and get to be a real hassle to clean. So I'm hoping by leaving it downstairs, I'll use it more frequently and keep the ink from solidifying in the nozzles. Underneath it is a laser printer, color laser printer, and I left enough space in the stand to open the top of the laser printer to replace the toner cartridges. I didn't want to have to pull it out in order to do that. So that's why it's a little bit tall, looks a little bit tall, but there's a reason for that. So, all right, that finishes up this project. Thanks for watching. Got other stuff going on, so stay tuned. We'll see you on the next one.